Dungeons & Dragons, a fantasy tabletop role-playing game released in 1974 that took the world by storm and became a big part of my life a few years ago. It is designed for everyone to experience life in vast, magical, mysterious, teased and unreleased worlds, inhabited by mythical creatures inspired by folklore and legend, where they can be enthralled by wonder and engaging stories together, as well as develop important social skills, such as negotiation, planning, teamwork, and shopping in town for hours. But before I can create a healthy and safe game for them to live out their plot-armored fantasy alter ego, before facing terrifying and life-threatening situations they have little chance of escaping from, and before they rediscovered their childhood sense of curiosity and courage, I needed a DM screen. Sorry, I needed my DM screen. It's common, a sign of commitment maybe. Don't worry about it. Here's my first one. This is the only picture I have of it because I threw it away. Don't ask me why, but let me explain how it worked with the help of a few state-of-the-art sketches. You get two binders, you glue them together. Then, you cover them in a velvety material on the player-facing side with a bit hanging from the bottom. You then attach a buckle that you salvage from a thrifted belt, and voila, you can close the thing, cover the top with the flappy part, and not only do you have a DM screen, but you can also store stuff inside, like papers, dice, minis, or whatever else you need. You can just carry this one object containing everything. But it was too bulky and too DIY for my taste. I wanted something more refined. This version was built using pretty thick wood boards that I covered in heat-shrinking vinyl used for furniture, with transparent plastic pockets for both the inside and outside, where I can insert artwork for the player's viewing pleasure or anything I needed on my side. However, it was too clean for the vibe we usually have at the table. Too heavy, and good luck trying to remove the pages I placed inside the pockets. With this version, I wanted to go vintage. If we play in fantasy worlds, maybe the screen should look handcrafted, rugged and worn. I decided I had to give the wood burning tool a shot after an impulse buy. The thin and simple design worked perfectly for me, and it was a joy creating the design, but not engraving it. I can be either excited or patient, not both. The transparent plastic strips that I can attach any piece of paper to with the information I need is an improvement. The hinges, however, didn't work at all from a visual standpoint. It turns out, it is extremely rare to find small vintage-looking hinges. So, I've seen what worked, what didn't, and I know that I want a cleaner and more interesting look for this version, but still going for that vintage distressed look. The drawing, however, will be engraved with laser. Alright, let's get to work. First, I need to establish which elements are important, what kind of elements I would like to include, and a way to arrange them in a functional way. It's clear that I want dice and elemental symbols, as well as use 3 planets and a sun, which I use in my brand's wallpaper. I haven't really clarified the lore for this homebrew world, but this seems to be a foundational aspect that I can build off of. The entire design should look like an ancient engraving in a wall, explaining how travel between the planets seems to work. Sometimes Ollie is open to assist me with the creative process. If not actively contributing, he'll supervise or do quality checks. The planets aren't necessarily in the same plane of existence, but their alignment is essential to this process. The central hole should align with the sun and the target planet during an eclipse, which will be represented with gold leaf. It is also really important for this design to assist the viewer's eyes towards the center and up towards me. When most of the obvious ideas are already on the page, some decorative elements can be considered before going forward with creating a concept using Photoshop and Illustrator. Now that I have some sort of starting point, I jump into Photoshop to play around with a bunch of ideas. I actually jump between Photoshop and Illustrator a lot during this stage. The creative process is not linear or predictable, a fact that I keep forgetting. Even though I'm more attracted to minimalistic design and aim for that end, in the early phases I go as far and wild as I can, just to see what happens. The orbit of the planets around the Sun, their alignment and the interaction between the eclipse and the rest of the magical mechanism are the foundations, so I need to figure them out first. Since this entire design should also look like a wall engraving, I had to mix hard edges with fine and clean curved lines or dots, but still keeping in mind the context that guides the eye towards the main elements. When I am satisfied with the big shapes, I can finally start decorating and elevating the entire piece. The first elements had to be the dice and the elemental symbols. They are geometric and cool and serve as beautiful accents. There is a lot of cleaning up and bouncing around as needed, as well as just trying things out to see if they work. Just so I can reassure myself regarding the direction this is going, I added a gold leaf texture to see what else I can do to contribute to this entire visual, if at all. I wanted to add my logo as a mark of pride and ownership, just as a decorative element, not a central or distracting one. The second element I had to include is some sort of texture, but considering it had to be in vector form, I had to be really careful about how I create it, as it could be extremely messy and hard to control, or just look disjointed from the rest of the piece. Lastly, I added some text using draconic and dwarven symbols, an aspect that can further contribute to the lore we're showcasing. And this is the final design. It looks beautiful and interesting, and it checks every box I wanted it to. Now, we send the project over for engraving and hope for the best.
Is that a weed?
No, this is a crayon.
I'm calling the police!
Well, I was right in thinking that laser engraving was a better choice than my attempt at wood burning. These turned out great. Each panel is made by gluing two poplar layers together after the initial engraving, just to provide some resistance against damage or curving. The engraving depth of 1 mm is enough for my purpose without compromising the structure, and it looks really accurate. Each panel measures 27 cm in length, 20 cm in width, and 0.7 cm in thickness. Now, we need to clean them up and see if I ruined them. At this point, I just need to clean up whatever edges or loose material might prove a problem further down the line, using whatever sandpaper I had at hand. It's pretty fine, I'm not sure what weight or type it was. There weren't too many issues to fix, mostly some very small bits of wood left on the edges that I removed, as well as making sure whatever parts had to connect at the same level did so properly. Ollie's making sure I'm doing a good job, but shortly after I started this, I became worried that the wood dust might affect him and relieved him of his duties. I didn't do a great job with aligning and leveling the edges though, but that is me being excited instead of patient. I suppose it's good enough and we can finally move on to the next stage. Applying gold foil was the part where everything would start to finally take shape and reveal if the concept was going to turn out how I hoped. However, before applying it, I had to use a bit of water-based wood stain to make sure the glue doesn't get totally absorbed by the wood. This is the same walnut wood stain that I will use for the rest of the project. You see me applying it carelessly, and that was a mistake, as the stain would jump out even after the project is complete. A good idea at this stage would have been to quickly rub a piece of cloth over the elevated parts where I painted outside the line so it fades out. Now I'm adding the glue everywhere I painted. This is a special glue for gold leaf that has a drying time of 15 minutes. The reckless way in which I totally ignore how much I paint outside the lines was fueled by the idea that I could clean the excess away with sandpaper after the fact. It didn't really work out though. This is not real gold leaf, by the way. It's just an imitation. It is affordable and looks great, however, it can oxidize over time. I didn't take into account how square the engravings will be, so whenever I tried to just let the foil rest and then tap it down, it would break and leave the middle empty. The solution was just to fold it and stick it in there as best as possible, removing the excess with a dish sponge. I decided I should fix some sections that didn't turn out great, so I repeat the process of using glue and foil if I felt necessary. Did I use one of my cat's toys? Yeah, why do you ask? It's not like he uses it. He hates toys that I pay money for. Staining was really fun to do. It was quick and dirty and the results were immediate. I could finally see if the entire piece was going to live up to what I imagined or not. The plan was to go fast and clean up as needed, as well as make sure I get inside every small bit of engraving. The color was close to version 3 at this pass, an earthy brown. After a bit of drying and when I started adding another layer, the color changed, becoming more intense and slightly shifting towards red. I didn't mind it though, it still looked great. I tried to pick up any excess with a clean piece of cloth. There were some sections where the stain bunched up. The gold leaf shines through exactly as I hoped it would, while taking a bit of the red hue and connecting the entire thing in a very pleasing way. I found a few more deeper spots where there wasn't enough color, so I fixed those real quick, but at this point, I had to call it and accept that this part didn't work exactly as expected. But overall, the effect was achieved and it looked great. This whole project relied on the panels looking good, but the hinges would make or break the entire final product. Luckily, I did manage to find vintage looking hinges, smaller than the ones used in version 3. Those were 2.5 centimeters in height, while these are 1.8. The panels are really light, so I'm sure they'll hold really well. However, I still had to cut the screws so they don't poke through. In version 3, I had to cut them after assembly using a Dremel tool. This time I wanted to avoid that stage. You can see that I used the popsicle stick as a divider between the panels for the hinges to move freely after assembly. This spacing was taken into account when designing the artwork and printing. I didn't mention the fact that we engraved slots on the back side of the panels. We shouldn't have done that. I've never had a printing project that involved front and back printing that turned out properly aligned. It's not anyone's fault, it's the way machines work. With their thickness, the hinges didn't need that extra slot, and the alignment was thrown off by this issue. You can see the moment of realization, and slowly settling into acceptance as I move forward and hope I can fix or live with it. The plastic straps that are used to hang whatever reference papers I needed are coming back, but this time I decided that 3 per panel were enough. After cutting them all at 1 centimeter in thickness, I had to figure out how much I have to bend on each side for the part that would be stuck with double-sided sticky tape. Then I had to mark the alignment guides on every panel. Finally, we stick the plastic strips to each panel, making sure everything is aligned and clean. And with that, the project is complete. Before presenting the final product, I need to go through what went right this time, what went wrong, and the plans I have for whenever I decide to make a version 5. The panel dimensions are great as they are. Sitting at 27 by 20, this DM screen is similar to a 13-inch laptop, easy to carry, light and functional. The engraving turned out great, and it looks beautiful, even with the mistakes I made. I'm sure to use this format going forward. The gold leaf is also an element that I will gladly include in future designs. Regarding the overall look, I think the aesthetics are right where I envisioned, with enough ruggedness to make it feel like it's old and part of a fantasy world, but sophisticated enough to describe the work required by the craftsman who made it. I'm not sure about the thickness, as version 3 and the initial plan for version 4 was to stick to a 3mm thickness, however it has to be a trade-off between a few aspects. If it's double layered, it will be thicker but won't bend as much and the screws generally won't poke through. If it's just one layer, it will be half the thickness, but it could curve when drying from the staining process, and there would have to be the cleanup after screwing in the screws. The staining process was pretty unpredictable, and the finished dried state is sticky enough to pick up dust, but not enough to affect anything else. I am unsure if it would be a good idea to use a damp rag every once in a while to clean if it gets too bad. Regardless, I need to educate myself more about water-based staining solutions. Also, I should have spent more time on the sanding part. The edges are not exactly flush, and it's probably where I showed my lack of patience the most. The sticky tape that I'm using was the same type I used for version 3. However, soon after assembly, I realized the panels were a lot more glossy and it wouldn't hold properly. I don't really want to use actual glue, but if I don't figure something else out, I'll have to use small staples and hope they don't poke out or bend. Maybe I can find the more heavy-duty double-sided sticky tape. Also, based on previous experience with version 3, I should add another bit of transparent plastic at the top of the panels to prevent papers from sliding when the screen is closed and move about. Sometimes you just pick it up upside down and all your plans decide to reveal themselves on the floor. If I fix these issues, maybe version 5 will be the final product proof and I could start making these things for other people. Who knows? With all that being said, thanks for watching and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.